But can I, I wouldn't want to disagree with anything that Chris has said, but that reflects the complexity of how you get European money. We've only got university level education in Cornwall because we had to do it in a way that was pleasing unto Europe, and you had to have the CUC as a result. What you've got now is quite complex. It's working very well. Aspects of it are working very well indeed. The only way it becomes the University of Cornwall or Cornwall University at the moment would be a kind of Crimean Russian sort of manoeuvre. I think is even beyond the bounds of the most ardent Cornish person. But, it is that's the complexity. Okay. That's the dilemma in a nutshell, isn't it?
Yeah. Come the revolution, then. Right, I'm going to move on. The next question was actually sent in on Twitter just a few minutes before the session started, so I don't think he's here. David Maguire, MD of Lungfish. No, it came on Twitter. Which sectors in the economy offer the biggest hope to not just bring prosperity, but spread prosperity to help Cornwall's deprived people?
Thank
Thelma.
you. Yes, we've always had a kind of problem with sectors in Cornwall. I mean, most of the companies in Cornwall are SMEs, but we are entrepreneurial, and I think we all work together very well. But the sectors I would rate myself personally, not necessarily what the LEP actually is listed, is marine, construction, tourism, leisure, and I think we've got to build on the strengths we've had historically, and we've got to build on the foundations of what we've put in place during the recent European programmes, such as digital, the creative industries, and also build on superfast broadband that's been put in place. I've also considered the fact that social enterprises are going to be a way forward, and Cornwall is very well placed to actually start working with that particular element. But we'll raise the economy we'll help the socially deprived by raising the economy of Cornwall. And as the top companies go up, we'll take people below up with us. And we'll need a lot of service industries in Cornwall for the people that aren't the top academics. There are vocational programs that we can use for them. The Economic Social Fund, that's going to be given quite a lot of money in the next programme, will actually have to work with the various sectors to see actually what skills the businesses want to help develop those sectors. It's no good actually training people in Cornwall to do jobs, to have skills that we don't have the jobs for. There's got to be cohesion between both the educators and businesses have got to step up to the plate and help and decide and contribute to training for their own businesses. We can't always be providing it for them free. There isn't the government money there anymore. And after we've had this next round of funding, we've got to be sustainable beyond that.
Okay.
I just want to add to what Thelma was saying about, because we mustn't forget food and drink.
Oh no, I've got that on my list and I missed it.
and food and drink now contributes 300 million to the Cornish economy. I mean, this is a huge success story for us, which we can build on.
Is food and drink one of those industries that can really help deprive people and deprive communities?
Of course it can. And the whole farming community as well, and all the associated activities which go on in farming. I mean, it's really important. We underestimate, I think, the contribution that they can make, and it's like farming is our core industry.
If I could just come back on that just a second. Food technology is absolutely critical, and we're making great strides with that. Duchy College actually is leading the field in that on a national basis, and we really do have to capitalise on that. So I'll stop there.
Right. Who needs to put in place, Oliver, the mechanisms by which the Cornwall's deprived people benefit from food and drink? Is it happening now? Is it happening by the fact that it's a rural
That's
industry?
That's a very, very big question. Okay, how long have you got?
I've got 30 seconds. You've got 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I mean, I think we need to, balancing the kind of conversation we've just had, we need to recognise that there's some massive, massive challenges facing us. And I'll just mention, just one of the many, is the £196 million that's going to come out of our public services over the next 4 years. And that would be £196 million every single year. And remember, public services from Cornwall Council primarily are directed at the least able in our society. Now, how are we going to deal with that one? I don't think we'll do it through European funding. So we've got, and I say this seriously because I think we've got to do some very, very careful collective thinking about how we're going to support our communities and the weakest or most disadvantaged in those communities. I think we've got a very great challenge up ahead of us.
Okay. And Andrew, the Salonians, in some ways the luckiest people in the world, living in a wonderful place, but often cited as deprived and obviously disconnected from lots of things. What do you think they're going to feel are the industries which are going to help the Isles of Scilly over the coming years?
Well, I think the parallel with Cornwall is that the islands are heavily dependent on the tourism sector, and there's nothing wrong with that. We should be proud of it. But I think it's good to diversify that base, and we're going to do that by training our young people in some of the ideas are very encouraging that we've heard here tonight. But if I could just come back to the food and drink sector, which Oliver's quite right to pick up on. Actually, the agri-food industry in Cornwall is worth £1.2 billion. It's one of the largest sectors, and those figures are 3 years out of date now, so it's probably larger than that. So it's a very exciting sector, and it sounds enormous, but of course in global terms it isn't, because food security is a major issue for the planet. We should all worry if we knew the proportion of fundamental foodstuffs which are produced on enormous scales now in huge units. So where if something went wrong, the implications just aren't worth thinking about. But what we've got in Cornwall, of course, is relatively niche or boutique production, even at that scale. And so we need to make the most of our values, the Cornish values, you know, the fresh air and the independence and the quality associated with some of the best grassland on the planet. And we're beginning to do that. We're seeing some great businesses from the agri-food sector spring up. And I think we need to work actually with other sectors to promote those values and to promote Cornwall as a really powerful economic region.
Okay. Peter, I'm not saying that the whole agricultural area isn't traditional, but as a leader of a more traditional sort of heavy industry in Cornwall, prosperity, is that going to come from the traditional industries or the new ones?
Everybody will have to change. I mean, everybody's got to adapt to the new economy. Renewables is a big sector. So you can pick out the sectors. The actual question was what we're going to do about deprived people, and there's deprived areas in Cornwall, you know, there's third generation people still on benefits. And that's a social question to answer. I mean, I'm not an employment exchange. I don't go out to employ people, and we all have social responsibilities. But the question is about what do you do about deprived people? And the answer is you've got to upskill them and train them. And again, go back to the next tranche of the European money. There's 135 million for employment and skills, over half of which is just pointed at skill sets for deprived people, for deprived communities, because that's the way forward. We need to train the people, give them the confidence, and then they can get into these new industries. And it's, you know, good adverts for industries, but unless you've got the people, if the industry doesn't work, it doesn't create employment. If you haven't got employment, everybody's where they were 10 years ago. Simple answer.
Okay. Right, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from Henry Maples. Henry.
Hi, Henry Maples from Brown Associates.
Do you want to get the mic around there?
Hello. Given the recent news in yesterday's budget that there wouldn't be any funding support for the local transport infrastructure, and the ongoing problems we've had with the railway line in Dawlish, and that highlights a more general problem at our disconnect with the rest of the country. Interested to know what the panel think is the best approach, whether it's using this next round of EU funding or otherwise for improving our connections to the rest of the country.
Okay. And I would just like to put an end piece on that before I put it to the panel, and which will help Cornwall reach its potential. Is that okay, Henry, to add that? Okay. Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that's a very interesting point. And I read what was said in the budget, and perhaps it's not as simple as that, because, of course, the money's available, hopefully, through the Local Enterprise Partnership, but direct from government, direct from Europe for major infrastructure projects. So the obvious ones, perhaps not worth listing, but if we split them into two, perhaps, those which are the responsibility of national or local government, and they're pretty obvious. You know, when the railway lines at Dawlish were swinging in the breeze, it was quite an interesting picture, and the Prime Minister and everybody else was there to have their picture taken. That's a government response, as is probably the A30 and the A303. And living on islands, I should say, harbours and airports as well. But it seems to me that there's more to this that other parts of the community can rise to. So broadband is a hugely important asset. The aspiration is perhaps for 96% coverage in Cornwall. That's fine, but what about the 4%? Communities with help perhaps can address that in different ways using 3G and 4G technology. There's some really interesting work going on in that area, and I think it's important that we reach all of those distant communities. And again, roads aren't just the A30 and the A303. A very large percentage of our roads in Cornwall are unclassified, and they go down lanes, and at the end of those lanes are the businesses that we've been talking about. It's really important they're connected, and we need to think of ways that we can keep those connections open. One last infrastructure aspect which occurs to me, which is crucially important, is housing. Now, we tend to look to the government for that in the bigger picture, but actually it's quite interesting that in France, 60% of all new housing today is self-build. So perhaps there are other ways of approaching infrastructure challenges than just looking for sort of national pots of money.